Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Mind Movement Health Podcast. I'm excited today. I've got a special guest on the podcast. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, well, I am too, because I always love geeking out with people. All our listeners know how much I love chatting about nutrition and health. So, connecting with other people from around the world is super amazing in this day and age just to geek out about all things health and wellness. But before we dive in, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, I would love to. And we were talking a little bit before. We're on opposite ends of the world, which is so fun to connect in that way. So I'm Elizabeth, and my biggest thing is just helping women heal their relationship with their bodies and with food and create healthy habits that are sustainable so that they can live the life of health that they want. So I go deeper than just like, here's a plan. I really like to go into the psychology behind, what makes behavior change stick and how do we find balance with food in a world that's so diet cultured, right? So focused on restriction. And I really try to shift the narrative that um, nourishing and nurturing our body is the best way to create sustainable health.
Well, I 100% agree pretty much with all of that. But I do, as you kind of said, I do think it's hard in this day and age to, steer clear. There's so many, influences and diets that people are following and the new thing that's just popped up that people want to try. So do you have any advice to sort of women listening in that, that sometimes maybe go, oh, my friend's following this diet and I should try that one. Or I've heard about this somewhere on social media and maybe I'll jump on that bandwagon now.
It's really hard. It's really hard to kind of avoid that, especially if you see a friend getting results, right? Or someone that you care about. You're like, oh, they have what I want. And so I think it's important that, we acknowledge that there's a lot of noise out there and then recognize that we have the ability to know and meet the needs of our own body. And I actually started in this industry as a personal trainer, and I would give everyone a perfect plan, right? These perfect plans that you're talking about. I would give my clients these perfect plans. And what happened most of the time is that they would come back, not have results because they didn't follow the plan. And so if it was as simple as here's the plan, follow it, we really wouldn't need the diet industry, right? We wouldn't keep going back for more. And so I think it's just really an awareness first. Is just recognizing like, okay, maybe this is working for them and I don't know the full story, right? I don't know the full picture. I don't know how much restriction there is. I don't know the long-term side effects here. I don't know what's going to happen. But I also have the ability to tap into my body's needs and do what works best for me. And when we can start with that, kind of that almost beginning to trust our bodies. I know it can feel really overwhelming at first, especially if you've tried so many different diets and it's like, well, I can't trust my body. I lose control when I'm not tracking or whatever. But it's taking that first step and just saying, my body can be trusted. And then from there, I can make choices to help build that trust.
Mm. And I think, sometimes it sounds a bit funny because it's almost like you do need to do a bit of sort of soul searching and maybe sort of hone in on your intuition and stuff as well and get comfortable in your body and really build up that body awareness. And that's where I think sometimes things like, Pilates and yoga and meditation, where you actually have to be present in your body for that time, can then help you sort of on the path, if it's, nutrition or whatever, help you with those other choices because you have spent time building that awareness and that connection to knowing your body.
Yeah, and one thing that I kind of like to say is it's not necessarily the sexy route, if you would say. Thinking about especially when we are so conditioned to burn more calories, right? Lose more weight. The thought of potentially doing some of these modalities of exercise that feel a little bit less burn, you know? And Pilates can be hard. Yoga can, I mean, I know that they come with that, but there's also that connection of mindfulness that I think we want to push aside just because it doesn't necessarily like on paper say this is exactly the outcome. But when we realize what mindfulness does for that overall health, we realize how important it really is to the health of our body, like the big picture of health. And then it helps us realize like these things are important and I would maybe say essential, right? To reconnect with your body in those ways.
I agree. And I think too, as women get older, and as we know, as women start to sort of hit the perimenopause and then the menopause stage, and hormones are changing, and the effects of cortisol and stress, have, bigger effects on our body, and whether or not that translates into, some weight gain around the middle that we can't sort of get rid of, or, maybe it's the joint pain that never used to bother us at all that then starts to, flare up. I think that's when if we start to explore some of these other, you know, lower impact modalities and fitness, it can actually be very beneficial, but sometimes it does take that change of mindset and really embracing that mindfulness as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when you're working with your clients, generally are you working with women sort of in midlife that are starting to start to hit these changes as well?
Yes, yes, I definitely. Just the other day, a member in my community was just saying, you know, she's in the thick of menopause right now, and it's frustrating because some of the things that she was doing to support her health aren't providing the exact same outcomes that she used to experience. And she mentioned the same thing. I'm getting more weight around my midsection, and so I think it's kind of important there to really understand also how our bodies change. Start to get that idea. And also, and this is something that like I love and I'm very passionate about, is making sure that you keep that relationship with that body because you're kind of transitioning into a different body. If we're being honest, I mean, we all go through different like body identities, right? Maybe when we're younger, we're an athlete or something, and then we become a mother and we transition, pregnancy and postpartum, and then we transition through menopause, and there are several different body identities that we really have to learn how to be at home with throughout that process.
Mm. And I love that because, it's a sort of the same with the exercise. Like in your 20s, you may have been going to the gym every day. In the 30s, you've got your kids and that, things have to change because you just don't have the same amount of time available or maybe even energy as well. Then you hit your 40s and what you were trying to do in your 20s, you think I'll try and do that again, but it just doesn't work out the same. So I can definitely relate to that with hearing from women too, that they go through that cycle with other, areas of their life in relation to their body too.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that's why, I think it's so important to really commit to that relationship of the body because diet culture and the diet industry, they kind of teach us to escape our bodies, right? Usually when we are starting to create a change, it comes from a place of I'm not comfortable in my body. I don't like my body. I'm the heaviest I've ever been. I'm struggling with joint pain, right? Like anything where it's like I want to escape this body, and the real transformation, the real happiness comes not escaping, but really embracing, right? Really embracing, okay, this is the body that I have, and I don't need to shame it or punish it to change. I can nurture and nourish it to change in this season. And that looks different, like we said, at different times.
Mm. What I will say though is if you look at it from like a cultural and society point of view though, it is really hard sometimes to be okay with that when see maybe you're watching a TV series and lots of people have had fillers and lip injections and we're trying to look a different way to what the natural sort of aging look would be. And that's constantly reinforced. No matter if you're watching the news or, looking at social media, it seems to be everywhere a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you wonder how many of those things are actually real, right? But if you think about it, that it really comes down to I like to say there's three different kinds of body comparison that women go through. Comparison to um an ideal. So we see like, oh, this is what my body is supposed to look like or supposed to do or whatever, right? I'm supposed to look this way. Comparison to others. So she looks different than me, or she lost the weight. And then comparison to ourselves. We may have been, maybe I was more fit 10 years ago, or, comparison to, oh, I was an athlete and now I don't feel like an athlete. And at some point in our lives, we decided, or were told, I think probably more we were told, that the difference was wrong or bad. And so we create this, I mean, we create this expectation that we need to conform to whatever that different is, right? The ideal or hers or what it used to be, because we've created that the difference is bad. But wouldn't it be so cool if we could shift that mentality and say, yeah, my body's different, and that's what's good about it, and I can do these things, and that's the best part about me is that I'm unique, and different doesn't have to be bad or wrong.
Mm. I think that's an important message too to try to get across to our sort of younger generation and our kids. So if they can start to grow up with that from the start, then hopefully as they start to age and, choose and make different decisions, that hopefully it's reflective on that as well.
I know. I have two little girls. One's 6 and oh, I have a 1-year-old girl. And I think a lot about that because I had a neighbor tell me just the other day that some of the girls are making fun of her for her size, because they saw the size of her clothes and it doesn't match her age. And so she was asking her mom, like, why am I in a 12, 14 when I'm a 8, 10, like, or I'm 10 years old or whatever. And so it's interesting. These conversations really are happening in kids and adult women, right? I think we're aware of that and just kind of recognizing, like you said, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm definitely here for the discussion of, how do I help them build that? And I think it's really fortifying that relationship and recognizing it's good in all those seasons and stages. And if we can remember that as adult women, right? Go back to that of, oh yeah, my body is good and it's capable of good things.
Yeah, and I think it's changing that focus too, rather than sometimes focusing on the sort of outside and the superficial. It's like, well, how strong am I now in comparison to 5 years ago? And focus more on, what your body is capable of actually doing rather than how it looks, because it can look very differently, to what it did, but it could be a lot more capable in many different ways.
Yeah, I differ a little bit from coaches because I always tell my clients to focus on feelings more than numbers because feelings they they mean something. So if you feel good in your body, right? Or you feel confident, regardless of what number is on the scale, if you feel confident in your habits and you're working toward things, your body's going to match your habits, okay? It's going to shift and change according to your habits. But there's so much more emotion, so much more, I don't even know what the word is, but it just makes you feel better when you can focus on those feelings rather than a number that we assign meaning to that doesn't actually have an inherent meaning.
Yeah, well, I do the same in the similar sense with my clients that I'll say, how do your clothes fit? Rather than stepping on the scales, because some people really freak out when they step on the scales. I'm like, how do your clothes fit? Go more off that. And, maybe you've built more muscle in this period of time. So the scales are naturally going to go up because muscle weighs more than fat. But a lot of women do have a lot of issues with just stepping on the scales and seeing that number go up, go down. So I think tuning into your feelings and that is definitely a much better look at it rather than referring to that number.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of people, we're just talking about habits and healthy habits, and there's lots of different healthy habits that we hear about. But what are some of the ones that, are really, do you think are really fundamental that, we should be thinking about sort of just to keep our overall health and wellness, at the point that we want?
Yeah, so I have four core habits that I teach. And if you can master these four core habits, you can achieve any health goal. And you're going to love my first one because you teach this movement. Move your body. That is so important. If you want to feel good today, move your body. I don't care what the number on the scale says or anything. If you want to feel better in your body, you need to be moving it, and it will feel better physically, but you will also feel better emotionally and energy wise and all of the above. So that's the first um, core habit that is essential, especially for women. And I would suggest, some form of strength or load bearing for women, especially as we reach menopause age and all of that. The second core habit is mindful eating. We need to learn how to connect with our body and recognize hunger and fullness cues because that is the most pivotal first step in being able to balance food, right? Eating the right amount without constantly like being chaotic eaters, right? Eating too much, eating too less, overeating, binging, emotional eating. When you learn how to step into a mindful eating practice, all of those cravings and emotional eating episodes, they start to disappear because you start to connect with your body and meet those needs. The third one is having a nutrition strategy. We we have to have the right macronutrient balance in order to rely on our hunger and fullness cues, right? Your body needs protein. It's a satisfaction macronutrient. So it tells you, hey, I'm full. We need fats. We need carbohydrates in certain quantities that support the needs of our body. And so we have to, along with the mindful eating, add in a nutrition strategy, right? Am I getting the right nutrients that my body needs? Then it will give me the right cues. And then the fourth one is kind of I don't know if it's a habit, but I really just call it endurance, right? You just keep showing up. Um, so many diet plans, weight loss plans, they are very time bound. And the truth is, our lives are not time bound. We don't know what time we have, but we aren't living in 30 days, right? We have a life to live. And so if we can recognize that these habits we create are habits that we're going to keep with us, we just need to keep going, keep showing up with those habits.
And if someone's kind of listening in and they're like, oh, what does really, mindful eating mean? Like, how would I start that? Where do you just suggest people sort of begin with? They're thinking of trying that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I want to give you an analogy because I think it might help visualize this because mindful eating can be an interesting concept for some, and it might feel a little overwhelming. I'm too busy. I can't sit still, all of that. So, I have three kids and I've potty trained two of them so far. And if anybody has potty trained, they're really going to understand this analogy. If you haven't, you'll still get it. But when you potty train a child, the first day or two, you are all hands on deck because you're trying to teach that child how to recognize that cue of, I needing to use the restroom. And so you're all hands on deck. You're not going anywhere. You're staying in basically the same room. You're focused on that all day long. And then maybe the next couple of days, you're like, okay, we can go to the park. Like we're doing okay. I think we can venture out a little bit. We'll be outside. Maybe we have a couple accidents, but eventually you get to a point where that child recognizes those cues wherever you are. And so you don't have to worry about staying close to home and being um, really on top of it because they know those cues. That's how mindful eating and a practice of mindful eating is. At first, we need to kind of have a little all hands on deck conversation about it's time to reconnect with your body. At some point in your journey, you've disconnected. You've forgotten what it feels like. You've ignored your cues, all those things. And so, what I suggest for the first little bit is have someone pick one meal per day where you can sit down and pay attention. And I'll include this in the show notes if you want, but I have a free mindful eating audio meditation. It's just 6 minutes long. You just sit down and you listen to it while you're eating, and it just kind of helps you connect with the food and connect with your body's cues. So you do that for a little bit, and then you start to learn what it feels like to be hungry, what it feels like to be full and satisfied, and know I can stop here, I can stop eating here. This is my fullness cue. And then you can take that skill that you've developed and use it at a party, at a restaurant, at an event, and not lose control around food.
Mm. I like the analogy because it makes me think toilet training our kids, and then we got a puppy recently. So even if you
Oh,
haven't had kids and you've had to toilet train a puppy, then you know what that's like too.
yeah.
No, I love that approach. And I think, as you sort of saying before, it is coming back to that mindfulness piece of connecting with the body, of just building that body awareness. And then you can use that around your food and nutrition and around your movement and around those other areas of your life. It's only going to serve you well in all areas of your health, really, in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know you talk about food freedom. So what does that mean when, I know some people like to be very strict with their diets, and people often say to me, like, I'm an all or nothing person. So I'm all in or I'm all out. So can you expand on what food freedom is too?
Yeah, that's a good question because there's a lot of different opinions about food freedom. But what I really believe and what I've seen in my clients is food freedom is a confident relationship with food. And that's a little bit unique for everyone. And it's not a perfect relationship with food, but it is a balanced relationship. And so I think about a pendulum, and you mentioned, or let's actually give the analogy of a swing. You mentioned, if someone's all in or all out, it's kind of like a swing. When you pull a swing back really, really far, the only way it has to go is really, really far in the other direction. So the more strict that you follow, right? The more restriction you follow, the more you kind of pull back that swing and really set yourself up for losing control, right? All out, overeating, binging, all of that. And so, and it's the same thing with the other side. Some people say food freedom is I can eat what I want when I want, but food freedom really is about meeting the needs of your body. And we don't need cookies all day long, right? That's not the only thing our body needs. And so if we swing that other direction where it's, freedom, freedom all the time, at some point we usually get into a space of like, I've got to restrict because I've lost control. So food freedom, if we think about the swing or even a pendulum, it's in the middle. It's knowing that food is available and I can have it and I can enjoy food. It also is recognizing that there may be some boundaries that I need to have on food or some strategy for myself to help me eat the foods that satisfy my physiological needs. So it's really finding the balance between those two.
Hmm. Well, I often like to think, like, even when it's like, you've got chocolate or cookies or whatever in the house, it's like they'll still be there tomorrow. Like, do you know what I mean? And they'll be there the next day. And if you run out, there's more at the shops. Like, we're in a very fortunate state, in this day and age that we have access to food, an abundance of food is around. So sometimes I actually use that just in the back of my mind that, I'll have a biscuit today and that's fine because they're still going to be there tomorrow. And, maybe that works for some people. It does work for me when I'm like, will I have another one or another one after that? It's just like, yeah, it's always there. It's just whether or not you could again tune into your feelings. Do you really feel like you need it now? Or is there something else going on too that's sort of, making you want to feel that you need it? But technically, like you said, I've eaten enough. I'm not hungry. I've listened to those cues. So maybe there's some other stressful situation that's happening that's influencing my decision right now.
Yeah, and people sometimes ask me, is food freedom having cookies in my kitchen and just like having the willpower not to eat them, right? Like, should I be strong enough for this? Is that food freedom? And I really believe we all have different personalities and different tendencies. So if something is sitting on my counter, I am more likely to go for it if it's there. Or if I've baked cookies and I know where they are in the cupboard, I'm more likely to go for them. It's just kind of more my personality. My husband and son, they could go stale. Like they would eat them the night of and then forget all about them, don't even care about them, right? And so, one of my personal strategies is that I don't necessarily have a lot of, um, I guess, temptations or treats in my home because I know that I would likely eat more than I want. I have, control and all of that, but I would probably eat a little more than I would if it's at the store available to me, like you mentioned. And so I know that, like, that is at the store available to me anytime. I can go get the cookie, I can go get the candy bar or whatever. But it doesn't necessarily need to sit in my home for it to be available, for it to be free to me. And it's sometimes really fun to also put some fun to fun foods, right? So I love peanut M&Ms. And whenever we go on a road trip, I always get like a bag of peanut M&Ms at the gas station, and it's just like a really fun thing for me. If I had a whole bag at my house, I'd probably eat it more often than just the road trip, you know? And so I enjoy that. Or if we like sometimes we're going on a date and we're not doing food, like I'll do something like that. But um knowing that it's available to you and it doesn't have to be right in front of you to say, I can have this anytime. It also is allowed to have some space from you, and that can still be food freedom.
Mm. And I like how you mentioned the word strategy there, because I think, that's something that maybe we don't think about. But if we have some strategies around food or movement or stress, then when we do get into these situations where we know that we tend to make a decision that maybe we don't want to make, we end up making it. If we can lean into those strategies, then that can help support our, decision making as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. Now, when it comes to sort of health, and we've talked about habits, when we're talking about the macros before, are there some, sort of non-negotiables that people should be really aiming for when it comes to the balance of the macros?
Yes. And I know you've probably heard it a million times, but make protein your friend because protein is really what's going to help satisfy your hunger cue. It's going to satisfy your body. So there's a website, maybe you've heard of it, called Precision Nutrition. And they teach a really cool, simple strategy for getting the right macronutrient balance using the palm of your hand. So with every meal, depending on your athletic level, like how active you are and things like that, you want to get 1 to 2 palm-sized portion of protein with a meal. That's usually about 30 grams of protein per meal, give or take. Um, you want to do a fist amount of veggies, a hand cup amount of carbohydrates, fruits included in there, and then a thumb size of fat. So 1 to 2, depending on body size and activity level. And that's a really easy way to just balance your plate. You don't have to track, weigh, measure anything. You can just look at your hand and go, okay, does this look about that much on my plate? And if you're kind of following that, you're going to get the right balance. So then you can rely on those body cues to say, yeah, I'm satisfied. We all know what happens when we start our day with like a bagel or something or a donut or a bread and nothing else. We get hungrier faster or we start to have more cravings. So proteins, um, good whole, like high fiber carbohydrates, fruits are part of that, whole grains, and fats are going to help satisfy those needs, and cravings truthfully almost disappear.
Well, that's a fantastic tip for everybody to listen in. Maybe just reevaluate your protein intake. And if people sort of struggle, maybe someone's listening in and they're vegetarian and they kind of go, I've really struggled to get 30 full grams at, breakfast and then lunch and dinner. Can you add it in like through the snack throughout the day? Like say maybe you just have an afternoon snack or something after dinner as well. Can you kind of go, well, I can manage maybe 20 grams in my meal and then sort of 8 to 10 grams in a snack later on in the day as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way. I always like to try to think of having protein every time I eat most of the times. And so, yeah, if you need that help, and I'm a huge fan of getting as much protein as you can from your foods, but there are always times for supplementation. So they make, if you're a vegetarian, they make they make vegetarian protein supplements or powders and things like that. And so it shouldn't be the primary source, but it can be an addition if you're struggling. And one way to know is if you are having cravings or if you are struggling to feel like you're eating constantly or you're hungry a lot, that's a kind of a good indicator to say, "Hey, I might want to look at my protein intake and see where I'm at."
Mm. And if some people are doing, say, intermittent fasting, and they're only eating 2 meals a day, or as sometimes at the minute, some people are only eating 1 meal a day, I'm assuming that's going to be much harder then to really meet your body's protein needs.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine what size meal that would be, right? Like you're trying to get your entire calories in one meal. It would be hard, and it's definitely not something that I personally follow. But I remember I had a boss once who was so busy. He owned like two businesses and he was working full time. And he did he basically did fasting because he didn't have time. And so he didn't eat all day and then he went home and ate like a dinner that was the size of lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which I'm like, that has to wreak havoc on your digestion. I don't know. I would think it would be crazy for me, but it's also important to remember that women are a little bit different in that regard, and our hormones fluctuate differently throughout the day. And so just be aware of that. That's not my area of expertise, but be aware that um, fasting for prolonged periods of time can affect your hormones.
And I think that's a really good tip because, as you said, shorter periods of time, maybe you're in a stage where you are wanting to lose weight or you've seen the doctor and they've said, hey, you're at risk of maybe diabetes and things like that. And you've got a bit of weight to lose and you may look into intermittent fasting for a shorter period of time. But then I think as this conversation's been about around that mindful eating, if you can then lean into that and adopt more of those strategies long term, then you're going to be able to most probably meet those nutritional needs in a much better way.
Yeah, and I think there's some chatter about is intermittent fasting another diet? And the truth is, a diet is really only a diet when the behavior makes it a diet. And so, intermittent fasting it can do some good things for you. It can have some good food boundaries, right? Maybe you actually really struggle overeating after 8 p.m. Like that's where your emotional eating is, or you struggle. And so maybe you set that boundary to say, I'm done by 8 p.m. And that helps prevent you from eating the foods that don't necessarily serve your body and from overeating, eating more calories than you need in a day. And so if we can recognize that, it's only a diet if it becomes that like diet behavior, the all or nothing, lose control, that kind of thing, versus, oh, this actually helps me create a boundary that supports what I want to do, then that can be a great option.
Mm. I like that sort of, flipping of changing the mindset too, from, thinking that, diet is more about restriction. So rather than it being a restriction, we think of it as a boundary or hopefully eventually just a habit that it turns into, that it's just a natural thing that we do because we know that we sleep better if we don't eat so late, and our digestion doesn't have to work in overtime and that sort of thing. So again, it's coming back and linking back to that mindset piece. Now, I
Yeah.
always like to ask my guests if there's one piece of health advice that you could give to our listeners that after listening to this podcast, they could pretty much go and instigate straight away, what would it be?
That's a good question. You are capable of knowing and meeting the needs of your own body. At some point in your life, you were taught or you learned somehow to suppress some of those feelings, right? Some of those cues or ignore them, right? Follow this plan, so you're going to ignore that hunger cue and make sure you get this much and eat when and blah blah blah, you know? And we lose connection with our body. And when we start to realize that we do have that control and our body is the only thing we need to to gain that control, to gain that balance, it's all about building evidence now that I can trust my body and I can do these things rather than I only know how to feel safe around food when I track it, right? Or when I'm weighing it or when I'm strict. And then we kind of come to this place of trust and recognize I don't have to track every calorie in order to um, honor my body's needs. And I can create change and nourish and support this body from a place of balance and mindfulness because I've connected to my body rather than them, this outside voice, right? Outside noise saying, this is the way that you have to do it.
Well, I think it's, as you're sort of saying, it's more about the progress and the change rather than seeking perfection as such, because what is, if we think about perfection, what is perfection? Like it's different for everybody at, different times at different ages, and everybody has different ideals. So I think, leaning into that mindfulness and looking at the progress of the changes that you make and how that's reflected in your energy, or what you can now do in comparison to maybe before. You can lift something heavier. You can, have a glass of alcohol and enjoy that one glass and not feel like you have to have that next glass. I think if we can focus on more of that, that's very helpful as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, just before we wrap up, if is there anything else that you'd like to highlight that you think that we haven't really sort of covered in our chat today?
That's a good question too. I feel like we've covered most of it. Is there anything you feel like we need to go deeper on? I think we kind of touched base on, the mindfulness and nutrition strategy. So yeah, I think it feels right.
That's all right. The last thing I would like to just touch on is around that sort of mindfulness and eating. We sort of talked about, how we would balance our plate out, but how big sort of does sort of distractions and things come into play? Like, a lot of people now, you see them when they go out to restaurants and they're on their phones. We're ordering. Most restaurants now, you need your phone to order. They don't even have a menu that they give you, or as you said before, your previous boss, just like, I just don't have time to eat. And part of, the culture here in Australia too is people will eat at their desk, at work, or people will be walking and eating and walking and drinking coffee and fitting their meals in around other things.
Yes. And I think none of us are immune from that busyness, right? I found myself doing similar things and really having to step back and be aware. I don't think we realize how chaotic of eaters we are. And we probably also don't realize that sitting on a phone, we may think we're sitting down, but we're not really paying attention to the food. And so what happens is we can totally miss that fullness cue and overeat, right? Because we're not paying attention. Or we could not eat enough and be hungry in 30 minutes. And that's where this we kind of spiral out of control because we're not meeting those needs, and then we find ourselves with cravings and snacking and all of that. And so it's just like the potty training analogy, this isn't meant for you to do all the time. I'm not saying that we can all sit down every meal and be mindful all the time. Okay, I get it. It's not realistic. But are there more opportunities that you can create, right? Create opportunities to be more mindful with your food and just see how it feels. Notice, pay attention. Because as you start to be more mindful, then you can recognize those cues a little bit more in those times that maybe you can't sit down and eat. Maybe you do need to rush and for a meeting, or you do need to eat lunch during your work hours today and you don't have that break, but you'll be way more inclined to um, meet your body's needs when you have that skill, when you've practiced that skill. So I really think it comes down to a lot of the message around health and wellness is that it's a chore. It's one extra thing to do. You probably feel this with Pilates too. People, like exercise, it's like one more thing on my to-do list for my body. But can we shift the mindset? Can we flip that script a little bit and say, this is my body is everything. It's what helps me show up. It's what helps me do what I'm best at. It helps me show up for work. It helps me show up for my family. It helps me do the things that I love. Why wouldn't I want to spend a little bit more time on that? And can I shift from one more chore, one more checklist to this is an opportunity to support my body?
Mm. And that's the key, isn't it? When you think of it like that, if we don't have our health, we can't do, we can't go to work, we can't look after our family, we can't do the things that we love. So why do we not think that it should be higher up on our priority list?
We have the message all wrong. I don't know where exactly it's coming from, but we are fed that message that health and wellness is hard and painful and to do, to do, to do. I have so many people that are like, "Oh, just tell me what to do, right? Just give me the meal plan. I don't and make sure it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to cook." And I'm like, okay, that's not really what we're going for. But the more that you engage in that work, a few years ago, I really started to enjoy cooking more. I found out that I needed to be more careful with gluten and dairy. And that's tricky. That's extra work, a lot of extra work sometimes. And at first it was really hard, but then I was able to shift my mentality to say, I actually want to spend more time in the kitchen. I enjoy making food. I enjoy eating it. And I wish we could all kind of get to that point where, hey, maybe I do want to spend a little bit more time in the kitchen because it actually nourishes my body when I do that.
Yeah. And then you see the flow on effects in your energy, in your productivity, in the progress that you're trying to make. So that's one of the big sort of messages that I'm always trying to get out to my clients that, it does pay off, but we have to put in a little bit to see those results come through. And consistency is a big part of that. And the more consistent you can be, even if it's just, 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there, it does pay off at the end of the day as long as it's following through.
Yeah, never be afraid of something that feels too small because it's more likely that you'll do it.
Hmm. I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so since we're on a podcast, I also have a podcast called the Woman of Wellness Podcast. You can go listen. We talk all about relationship with food, body, healthy habits, all of that, similar to what we've talked today about. And then I'll make sure you have that mindful eating meditation so that anyone can get that and kind of get started on being more mindful, connecting with their body. And yeah, I'm just pretty much everywhere at a Woman of Wellness, basically.
Amazing. Well, I'll link that all up in the show notes too. So listeners definitely head across there to grab that meditation as well and just connect with Elizabeth. Her podcast is great. I've been listening to it. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.